5-Minute Friday, and I'm going to tell you some stories about living in Zadar, Croatia. Now, a year ago, we spent 3 months living on the Dalmatian coast of the Adriatic. It's in Croatia. We discovered this town, Zadar, by looking at nomad lists and discovered that Zadar was the #1 hotspot for nomads. Well, there's not that many digital nomads there. As far as I know, we didn't really meet that many, but it was pretty perfect for us. And so I'll start by telling you about the neighborhood that we lived in. We actually didn't live in the neighborhood we were expecting. We lived in a really old neighborhood, several hundred years old, called Arbanasi. And this neighborhood was around when the Venetian Empire was in control of this territory of Croatia, which is about 400 years ago. So I'll talk a little bit about our neighborhood, but there was an old Venetian well on the seaside where the ships from Venice being a big trading empire, could come and get fresh water. So our house was only a couple blocks from the Adriatic, which is part of the Mediterranean. And when we got there, it was very cold weather-wise, almost freezing and snow flurries, but it eventually warmed up. The spring was beautiful and the water was quite cold, but that eventually got really, really nice. And tourist season started in about June, with picking up in July, which is when we got out of there because it did start to get crowded. But so our neighborhood, when we first arrived, was full of roses. We would walk through the neighborhoods and everybody had these beautiful pink and red and orange and yellow and white roses everywhere. Another thing that we noticed right away was that everybody had their own grapevine going over their carport, and everybody would make their own wine. So everyone would make a small harvest of grapes and use that to make wine every year. We moved next door to Anna, and she was an 87-year-old, and she only spoke Croatian and Italian, and we only spoke Spanish and English. And she wasn't doing so hot. She had moved from her main house out to her shed and didn't have any electricity. So we made friends with her and we would have her over for dinner. And we ran a extension cord from our house over to her house so she could have electricity and hot water because she really didn't have any money. And we became friends with her, and she would hold Axel in her lap and she would say, "Oh, Titi Bello, Titi Bello." And it was this beautiful relationship that they developed in the first few weeks that we lived there. And I've talked about this before, but she took a dramatic turn for the worst and pretty much quickly got sick and passed away in a matter of weeks while we were there. And it was pretty challenging for us because she was one of the most gracious, amazing women, and we couldn't even speak to her, right? So we shared all these times hanging out with her and taking care of her, and we never really had a conversation, which just goes to show you that human connection can happen even without knowing the same language. And we learned from people around the neighborhood that she never had kids, but she was sort of the woman in the neighborhood who always took care of the neighborhood kids, and she always fed people and always had the most beautiful house and manicured garden. And we also learned that she was really depressed after the war because the neighborhood was bombed during the War of Croatian Independence, or when the Yugoslavian coalition broke up, when in the 1991 time span. So anyway, our neighborhood was bombed, but many of the houses, her house and our house, was still going. Our house was 250 years old. And we found our house, which is amazing, 2-story, like a mini little castle with a courtyard and a garden, through our friends at the Zadar Outdoor Festival. Now, you can go back and listen to the episode about the Zadar Outdoor Festival, which is amazing. My friends Martina and Eva were organizing that and got to go caving and mountain biking and whitewater rafting and sailing and all kinds of amazing things involved with that festival. So that was early when we first arrived. So it was really good to get to meet people through the outdoor festival. But let's keep talking about the neighborhood. The neighborhood, we were just 2 blocks from the beach. And so as the weather started warming up, we would go down to the beach every morning and afternoon and swim, or I would swim half a mile in the morning and half a mile in the evening, and just lots of time in the water. Between our house and the beach was this one little restaurant, amazing wood-fired pizza And a lot of times we were the only people in the restaurant, and we had the same waiter every time. I wish I could remember his name. And he would always be our waiter and know what we like to get, which was the grilled fish and the pizza. And one of the best memories that we have was there's all these fruit trees throughout the neighborhood, and some of the houses which had been bombarded in the war were still unoccupied. And we found this one bombed out house or unoccupied house with 3 fruit trees, and they had a fruit that's kind of like an apricot or a pear. And anyway, these fruit were starting to fall off the tree. So every day we would sneak into the courtyard and pick a basket full of these fruits, and they're pretty sour. And you could pretty much only eat 5 or 6 of these in a day, or else it would affect your digestive system. But we got a lot of free fruit, and I really liked sneaking into the courtyard to pick fruit. I was constantly looking around like, who's going to see me stealing this fruit? It tasted that much better because we didn't have to pay for it. We just went and picked it. Now I would go on runs also around the neighborhood. I would run out to the point, Sunset Point, where there's these amazing cliffs that you can dive off of, and actually that's where I learned to do backflips into the water for the first time, which had always been on the bucket list. And when my friend Laden Juracek came to visit, he's the host of the Travel Wisdom podcast. He came and we recorded a video course, but we also spent some time learning to backflip into the ocean. So you can find video footage of us learning to do that. So we would run around the neighborhood. There's a lot of amazing old houses, but there's also a lot of Soviet-era gymnastics bars and fitness equipment that's sort of scattered along the waterfront. And it's cool because there's a lot of the architecture and things like the gymnastic equipment is left over from when it was a communist, the Yugoslavian coalition. But there's a ton of history there. Zadar was part of the Venetian Empire, part of the Roman Empire, and was settled for several thousand years before it was part of the Roman Empire. So there's multiple layers of architecture, and the city itself, the old town, used to be an island. Now it's a peninsula. They've sort of buried in the moats that used to separate it. But so there's a lot of history in this part of the world, this part of Croatia, and people there are really proud of their Croatian heritage and proud of their city and their neighborhood. We sort of did a little research before we went on Instagram, and we found things like the sea organ and St. Donat's Church. These are sort of the icons of the city of Zadar, and we didn't really spend that much time hanging out, but they're really cool places to go and experience. We made sure to go there our first night that we arrived. And there's also around the countryside, there's ruins of towers and castles. There's the world's smallest cathedral. There's old castles on peninsulas sticking out into the Dalmatian coast, and all these amazing islands that sort of form the Dalmatian chain of islands that go south from Zadar. They have fortresses and castles on them as well. So there's definitely plenty of history for people interested in history. And in addition to running around the neighborhood and swimming in the Adriatic, I would go on a lot of long bike rides too. At the time, I was writing the book Superconductors and listening to audiobooks and podcasts on my ride and just doing a lot of thinking. And I would ride through olive groves and wine country and sometimes take the ferry out to the islands and ride along the chain of islands. There's really some really nice riding. I got invited to go with the local cycling team on there's a national holiday, and they go on this big bike ride at 160 kilometers or something on the national holiday out to the Velebit Mountains, which are another national park. And we ride up to this monastery where this is beautiful freshwater spring, and then climb up the mountains, and then do this really long descent. And about 100 kilometers into the ride, we stopped and everyone got drunk and we ate a bunch of lamb. It's basically like a roadhouse, and all these people had come. They come to this place for a big lamb roast on the holiday, and everyone got drunk, and we ate so much food, and we still had 2 hours of riding left to do. So we got back on our bikes in the middle of the afternoon. It's starting to get hot. Everyone's a little bit drunk and full, And we rode so slowly for an hour after lunch before anybody could start moving again. So that was a real epic experience with that ride. And I was privileged to have my parents come and stay with us. We had a lot of guests come and stay with us, four different groups of people. But my parents came and stayed, and had my dad bring his cycling shoes and helmet, and we rented a bicycle for him, a road bicycle, and we did some amazing rides. And this was so cool because I've done a lot of cycling with my dad. We both live in the same city, St. Louis, right now, and we go on long road bike rides, and he's been riding bikes for as long as I can remember. And this is the first time we'd ever ridden in another country. He's come to ride in Colorado and Montana when I've lived there, but this is the first time we've ever ridden together in another country. So that was really cool, just to explore together with my dad on the bicycle. So we did have some people stay with us. Laden Juracek came and stayed with us. My parents, we had this amazing house, this 2-story, 250-year-old stone house. It was newly redone. Normally it's €200 a night, but we got the whole thing for €700 a month, partly to help our friend not have to spend her time renting it out so frequently, and partly because it was low season when we got there, and partly because we were maintaining the house. We were doing the gardening, looking after the place. But we were also able to host one of my clients to come stay with us for a week, and you can listen to her episode. She actually has an episode on this podcast. Anna Mascaro, founder of Terracotta Travel, just recently came on this podcast, and she came and we did some day-long VIP coaching, and she was also working on her business, working with local tour guides and building relationships for her luxury travel company while she was there. So yacht owners and hotels and things like that. And we also had a famous tattoo artist known as a tattoo shaman, Mao Hugat, and his family came to stay with us, and we got tattoos from him, and this is really special to get these tattoos, and doubly special to get them in our own home. And basically he talks to you a little bit about what you want your tattoo to mean, but then he does the tattoo freehand, and he just sort of channels what it's going to look like as he does it. So nobody really knows what it's going to look like until it's finished. So you're placing your faith in his ability, and gosh, we both, Heidi and I, got the best tattoos we could have imagined. So we really enjoyed hosting people at our house. And we also made a lot of local friends, a lot of Croatians and a lot of expats. And we would host parties. We hosted 4 or 5 parties, and we had people over for dinner all the time. We hosted a chalk mural art party where we spent all day doing chalk art on our courtyard, which was these great marble slabs. And it was nice to have this great space to host people. We had a 4th of July celebration with some of our American expat friends. We would play classical music on our speakers throughout the courtyard, and it was a very Mediterranean experience. The windows were always open. A beautiful time. We had a fig tree in our yard, and we would pick the fresh figs and put them in the refrigerator, and we eat cold, fresh figs, delicious. So, of course, as with anywhere, the people were a very significant, important part of our stay in Croatia. And the last thing I want to talk about is the little trips that we took, the national parks in Croatia. Croatia is pretty unique. It has a huge diversity of ecosystems. There are snow-capped mountains, there's fertile rolling farm fields, there's Mediterranean coast with islands, there's all kinds of different terrain, but there's 2 really special spots in Croatia that pretty much are unlike anywhere in the world. They're similar to each other. There's Krka National Park and Plitvice Lakes National Park. And pardon, if you're Croatian, pardon my pronunciation, because I'm not perfect. But these places have amazing water features. They're basically rivers with terraced pools. And how these pools form is there are dissolved minerals in the water that come from the limestone formations, and they re-solidify and form these natural dams that make lots of little mini terraces and waterfalls and lakes. And the water itself is generally this beautiful, clear turquoise blue, which gets that color partly because of the minerals. And these two places, we went to Kirka first, and it's a little bit smaller in scale than Plitvice Lakes. And Plitvice Lakes is one of the wonders of the world, in my opinion. It's one of the most magical places I've ever been. Not only do you have these waterfalls and pools and beauty, but you have this deep, deep ancient forest, this untouched virgin forest surrounding the national park. So the forest itself is part of the ecosystem. And Plitvice Lakes is very it's really popular, full of tourists. It was actually when Croatia was leaving the Yugoslav Republic, it was a major contention point. I guess the Serbians really wanted to retain that territory because it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. So they were fighting to hold on to this national park. And really, there's nothing like this place on earth. And we got to spend a few days staying at a hotel in this national park. And the last boat comes back across the lake at sunset, and I made sure that we wanted to be on that last boat, but we also wanted to be some of the last people out exploring the boardwalks of the national park, because during the height of the day, it's full of tourists, but in the evening, there was almost nobody out there, and we had the place to ourselves, and it was so special to get to explore this with my family. And if you ever get a chance to go there, I would say it's one of the top magical places I've ever been. So I know that is a lot more than 5 minutes, but this place, just 3 months there, and it feels like we crammed a lifetime into living there. And I can hardly believe that I got any work done, but I was working, honestly, while I was there, working on the book and coaching and producing this podcast and many other things. So if you're thinking about going to Croatia, you've probably heard of Dubrovnik and Split and Zagreb, but you might not have heard of Zadar. And I think it's probably still underrated. It's not somewhere that a lot of people know in North America, for sure. Maybe more popular in Europe, but definitely not too expensive, beautiful weather, beautiful neighborhoods, and right on the coast. An amazing spot for someone like a digital nomad to go spend some time, or just a great spot for a little European Mediterranean vacation. Oh, I just remembered a couple more stories that I wanted to include before I wrap this episode. One was just talking about the food. Heidi would walk to the local grocery store every day, and she would get fish, and we learned to cook fresh fish. But there's also these little meat pastries. They're like, I don't know, kind of like a croissant with sausage inside of them, a little tube, and we ate a lot of those. So that was definitely memorable. And we also took this sailing trip to a national marine park called Telastica. Excuse my pronunciation. And there's these big old sea cliffs and this walk with all kinds of butterflies along the sea cliffs. And there's also a salt lake. It's one of the saltiest salt lakes in the world. And so when you swim in it, it's like the Dead Sea. You float right up to the top. And that was a really cool experience to find this lake on an island in the sea, which is its own salt lake. All right, and that's the last story from living 3 months in Zadar, Croatia. Thanks so much for listening. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.